Right, welcome guys to my fourth tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to talk about camera and how we can make the camera follow the player. Right now the way we have it is that we have the player moving, but it can move off camera and then he disappear, right? Like maybe he fell off or something. We don't know what happened to the player. So what we want to do is we want to be able to track the player using the camera, right? So how do we do that? First, what we want to do is create a variable for camera, right? So go up here and just add this variable camera and, just call it cam, or call it whatever you want, but I call it cam like this. And then in the did move to view, what you want to do is assign that camera as a scene camera. So here you have self the add camera. Now you add the camera to the scene, right? And then it says let that camera of the scene now be this camera, right? Um, that allows you the camera to focus to be added to the scene and then make that new camera our scene camera, right? So to keep the camera at the player on the player, you want to do this: keep camera position on player. What you want to do is set the camera position to player position, right? If I run this, you will see that now the player will be followed by the camera. I mean, the camera will follow the player, right? As you can see, the player fell off. So anyway, but in our case, our camera is on the player, and the player is in the center of our camera. If we want our camera to aim a little bit above our player, we can just adjust its Y position. So in this case, I'm going to do camera.y position equal player.position.y. I'm just going to add a number so it points a little bit above. And you can adjust it until you get it just right. Maybe 10 more. 30. Just right. Just like that. Camera position that X. I want it to follow also the player's X position. You can play around with this, adjust it, so this gives you an idea of where you want the camera to be. The reason I put it in this update method that is because this method gets called every time the frame is rendered, so therefore keeping the camera right on the player before the thing is rendered. As you can see, now I have my camera pointing right about, let me replay this again, right about here. The camera will be in the same position, X position, as the player, but pointing a little bit above it in the Y position. So it'll be like around here somewhere. That way my player is not exactly in the center, but a little bit below the center. So as you can see, now we have another problem, right? And the problem is that our interface, or the button, the stuff that the user interact with, like the jump button, the shoot button, is not following the camera, right? So how do we fix that? So to fix that, we now have to set up our interface. I created a method already called setup interface, and all that does is keep the button's position relevant, relative in a relative position to the camera's position, right? So here, what we want to do is we want to check the bound of our screen, right? Because screen size can change depending on devices you're using. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the camera's position. I'm setting the button, for example, the shoot button, its X and Y position relative to the camera's position, right? And then I'm getting the size of the screen width divided by half, take away that, and that allows me to set the position for my shoot button X position in that coordinate. And what you have to do is play around with this until you get your camera just where you want it. And I already did that here, just like this. And another thing to consider while doing this is you gotta consider the size of your interface, right? If your interface is big, or you might want to increase the distance it is from the edge, right? And the reason we look for the bound and the width and the height in this case is because we want it to be the same distance from the edge no matter what screen size we're using, right? So now that you have this method set up, which keeps your interactive object like your button and left and right movement button close to the camera, once you have this, you want to call this here, so that way it keeps its position with the player. So now that I have this uncommented, you should see the effect in the game itself. And here you go again. So now when I move the player, you can see that the rest of the interactive object, like your button or your interface in this case, is following the camera's position. If you prefer your game to be like how it is in Mario, right? You know how in Mario the camera follows the player's movement left and right, but does not follow the player's movement up and down. If you don't like this, you can just do this where you have cam position dot camera position dot x equal player position dot x. That way you keep the x position consistent, but you don't do anything with the y position. However, if you still want the camera to point a little bit above the player, just go to your did move to view method, and once the game move to view, you want to set the camera's position. Alright, so here the camera's position, we did not set it. This would be the initial position, right? So once you set the y position, you have that position where the camera is pointing a little bit above the player. And let's also do the cam dot position dot x equal player dot position dot x. Excuse me, this should be player. So that way the camera is initially pointing at the player and then a little bit above it. And then in our update method, all we're doing is we're keeping track of the player's x position. We're keeping the camera's x position the same as the player's x position. That way if the player moves left or right, we have that. But when you do this, you have to consider that now when you add game element in your game, you have to make sure that the game object is not something that's too high or too low where the player can access it, right? In this case, if the player falls, he's just going to fall. The camera is not going to track him because you are not tracking X and Y axis. So if you go to your game scene like this box represents your screen, right? If the player is here, for example, and your camera's, or if the player is here, right, and your camera is pointing a little bit above the player, for example, your box will be up a little bit and then about right here, right, where it cuts the ground a little bit, right? And any game element you want the player to interact with must be within the height of the scene here, right? If you have anything above here, the player will not be able to access it. So you gotta make sure if you add like an enemy or a second enemy, for example, let's say add a second enemy, right? If the enemy is here, there's no way this player will be able to interact with this because the player cannot access it, right? And the player cannot jump that high. So if you add the enemy in your game, let's say you increase the size of your ground, for example, right? And then you want the player to encounter new enemy along the way, you must place your enemy within this bound. You cannot place it above here or down here because it's not going to be visible in the scene because you have the camera only tracking the X position of the player. But if you want the camera to also track the Y position of the player, simply just set the position like before in update method, where the Y is also being tracked like so, right? And another thing you want to do here is, we never talked about this. We haven't talked about this yet. So when the player falls down, nothing happens, right? And in game, usually when the player falls down, you want to end the game, right? Or just remove the game. So how do you do that? In that case, what you want to do is if player position, well, there's many ways you can make the game end. You can have the player die or remove the player completely from the scene, which stops the camera. Or if the player touch a lava, for example, maybe you can add a lava under your ground object and just kills the player when the player touches it, right? Or prevents the player from falling beyond the ground object. You can do that, right? So if you want to do that, all you have to do is do a check statement. You can do it here, so it's always checking if the player is under the ground. So you can just do it here like this, and check if player dot position dot x is less than ground dot position. Excuse me. We didn't reference the ground, so I have to go up here and add that ground object here. Uncomment that ground. So this is when we need a variable. It's when we plan on referencing it later down the line. This is where we want to do that. So here what I'm doing, I'm comparing play position to ground position. And if play position is less than ground position, take away ground dot size dot height. For example, if play position is less than ground dot height, that means the play position is below the ground position, right? Dot y. So that means if a player that, because we want to check the y, because when the player falls off the ground, we're not checking whether it's to the left or right. We want to check whether it's above or below, right? If the player's y position is below the ground's y position, we can assume that the player is under the ground position, right? However, the player also, the ground, also have a height, right? So the height, when you have a ground object, let me go back here. The center would be here. This is your y, right? When the player's y is below here, you know the player's under it. But when the player's is to check if the player's under it right here, but not halfway between it, you want to make sure the player position is under the height divided by 2, because half the height would be here, right? Half the height would be this part, and then under that would be here. So what you want to do is just do this will work too, but to be accurate, you can do this. If the player dot position dot y is less than ground position dot y, take away half its height. That means the player is under ground. So just make yourself a comment here. Say if player is under ground slash falling off ground. Maybe remove the player, right? So here you do player dot remove from parent, and that should remove the player. Or you can maybe display a message or add a new node that represents a game over, right? Or play a sound, whatever you want to do. This is where you would do your game over. In this case, I'm just going to remove the player so we don't have that issue anymore. And now we're going to test it. So this, because we call this in this update method, every time the player is under the ground, it's going to remove the player just like that and stop the game. And here's when you want to display your game over. So now that we solved that, we want to be able to also not just have the camera track the player, but how do we display information, right? Just like we did our button in our game, we want to display labels, right? Excuse me. Well, to add label, you just simply go here, and in your scene, you should have a note that you can add call label. Go to show library, view show library, and then iterate through this and just add label like this. And let's just call this, I don't know, ammo, for example, because we don't have a way to represent our ammo, right? Ammo, boom, equal, I don't know, let's just say 10. Whoops. Ammo 10, right? So now we have a way to represent our ammo. And let's call this ammo label. Oops. Label. Just like that. I'm going to copy this so I have it. Go back to your game scene and add that variable. That variable, just like any other variable that represents an object that you interact with in your game, let's give it a name like this and make it a variable, because that can change. If something that can change its state or whatever, if its value changes throughout the game, you want to make it a variable. That way, because ammo label, its text, for example, changes as the ammo gets used up or new ammo gets collected, right? So here you would do SKS label, because it's label. SK label node, and make that just an empty object right now. An object of SK label node, right? So, and then what we want to do is we also want to keep that, just like when we have our let me run this again. Just like when we have our controls following the player, we also want our label to follow the player, right? So if the player move left and right, we don't want our label to just go off the screen, right? So we want it to be somewhere here or here, whatever you want it. Just kind of play around with it, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my update method under here that I have, and in my setup interface method, I'm gonna add one more. I'm gonna add the label button. So I'm gonna have the label button similar to where I want my left button to be, left button. So here, I want my X to be the same, but I want my Y to be a little different, right? My Y, I want it to be, I don't know, let's say minus the height. Let me see, height divided by 2 would be half the height. So not half the height, I want it to be height minus, let's see, 50. Let's see what that looks like. And change this to ammo label. Ammo label. Oops. A little too high. Alright. 50. Let's see. Just kind of play around with it until you get it just exactly where you want it. You know, instead of minus, I want a plus because it's above the camera's Y position. Let's do plus on the height divided by 2 will be half of that. Minus 100. Let's see what that looks like. Let's see, minus 200. Yep. Just kind of play around with it until you get it just right. Oh, I forgot, I didn't add to the scene yet. So what you want to do is go up here, go to move to view. Just like we add everything else to the scene, we gotta also add our label to the scene. So just do this, and this would be SKS label node, just like that. And let's just call this label, not call this, but it has a name, just like that. And now it should update. Oops, let's come back here, ammo. Yep. Okay, let's see. Now that we know where it is, we can just say plus minus 300 will do like that. Just kind of keep playing with it until you get it just right. So here what I'm doing is I'm camera position is right at the Y above here, right? And get the height of it divided by 2. This plus that would make it, let me see. Let's do minus, let's see, minus 130. I'm gonna do a little bit above that so it's a little higher. Let's do 230. Let's do that. And also I'm gonna make its Z position 1, because everything we interact with, we want it to be above everything else in the scene, and so it's not behind ground, for example. Alright, so now that we have this, we can move a little left and right. Let's change that a little bit so it's not cut. Let's go back here into our screen instead of minus 150. I'm gonna do let's do this 300. Yep, perfect. So now your ammo and label, everything follows the player, right? So that's good. Now that we have that, we now got to make a variable to represent our ammo, right? We have our gun, we have a label, but it's not doing anything, right? That's pretty boring, right? So what we want to do is we want to have a variable that represents the player's ammo. We don't want the player just shoot infinite amount of ammo, right? I mean, you can, but usually a game has restriction, right? Like ammo, for example, right? Ammo count. Let's give a player 10 by default. And every time a player shoots a gun, we'll just, before he can shoot anything, we'll just do this, right? Shoot gun. Let's go touch again, whether we press the shoot button, right? So here, when a player, before the player shoots a button, let's do an if statement here. We want to check if we have enough ammo before we shoot, right? So we'll do if, ammo count is greater than 0, then we'll shoot the gun, right? Shoot the gun. And then we also want to update ammo count, right? So that equal, let's equal 1, which is the same thing as taking away 1. Let's see. Now that we have this and update the count, if it's 0, we won't be able to shoot the gun, right? So here, what we want to do now is, now that we have the ammo count updating when the bullet gets used up, we want to also update the label. So go to the update method. You can also do, there's two ways to update a label on the screen. You can do something called property observer, and which is like did set and then change the label, or you can just set the label here to also always equal your variable you're representing. So I'm just gonna do it this way, which is a lot easier, so that way I keep everything consistent. So here I'm gonna do ammo label dot text equal, we'll just do like that, and then we'll add the count here. So here would be ammo count. So because this is called for every frame is surrender, the text label will always be equal this string with an ammo count. I'm gonna run this, and you can see that now if I shoot the gun, the ammo count gets updated. I cannot shoot the gun anymore. And here you go. That's how you make label and controls and follow your camera and the player, and also a game over. So if the player go out of bound or whatever. So that's pretty much all I want to talk about right now. In the next episode, I'm gonna do how to add sound effect to your game, background music. Also maybe how to add explosion. Because a game is not fun without explosion, right? Thanks again, guys, for watching my video, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.